That drone started trying to struggle away, its little fan blade so eager for the sky, I turned its camera to my face, hoping this little thing was high dollar enough to have a mic, and Heather Donahue'd some very specific instructions. From Hardy's airboat dragging behind the yacht on a bright yellow tow rope, a crew member working on it, I can tell Lemmy heard. That ridiculous little boat is my magic bicycle. I let the drone go like a butterfly I'd had cupped in my hands, and it buzzes up into open air, leans forward for the bow of the English rose, for Lemmy to snatch out of the air. A ladder unfurls over the side. When I still only have one arm, and not that much blood, Lemmy hops down, and it's not noble, Harrison would hate it, but Lemmy gets me up there in his arms, like the damsel I'm not, deposits me on deck. "You made it," he says, and I have to look away to keep my voice steady. Yeah, I guess I did. "We heard about Letha," Lena Singleton says in her severe voice, from behind me. "Already?" I ask. "She made that deputy post that damned video on social media," Lena says, her lips tight with disapproval. Sounds about right. If the footage doesn't start proliferating on its own, then some high-dollar lawyer can get it erased. I know a thing or two about that. "She won't be in long," Lemmy says, draping a towel around my shoulders. We'll buy the detention center, won't we, Ma?" Lena Singleton just shrugs, holding me in her eyes, cataloging the damage, maybe. It takes a while. "She'll outbid you for it," I inform Lemmy, holding his eyes long enough for him to cue in that I'm not joking here. Lemmy leads me back to the stateroom, or whatever it is, to change into jeans and a black t-shirt. The shirt fits, but when I wear the towel out like a skirt, Lena understands without making a fuss, brings me another pair of the same sweatpants. The shirt's got a face quartered together on the front. Freddie and Jason and Michael and Leatherface. "Cinnamons again?" I say. Lena shrugs like that doesn't matter, but Lemmy nods. "She saw that drone footage you showed in class?" I have to ask. Lemmy shrugs again, not wanting to get anyone in trouble. She did, though. Had to. It's how she knew to go hide Hetty and Paul in Wainbow, spook the horse off, roll the motorcycle into the lake. All she had to do, probably, was tell Lemmy she wanted to learn to fly one of those drones. While she was steering from her chair, though, she thumbed into the recordings, sent it to herself, erased her back trail. "She's over there," I say, pointing with lips to the dam. Last night's movie, The Massacre. "She wanted us to drop her off, yeah," Lemmy says. "Butcher, baker, nightmare maker," I mutter, hitting Cinnamon and Ginger and Mars's last name a bit extra hard. "The fabulous Baker girls," Lemmy adds with a halfway grin. "You two done with whatever this is?" Lena asks, batting her eyes with impatience. On the second trip into the stateroom, my phone's right there where I left it, blinking with Letha's last message, with the voice memos I sent. And there's a cord plugged into the phone, too. These fuckers. Can't I just hate them and let that be that? "So?" Lena says when I come back. She's sitting cross-legged in a chair, is smoking a cigarette. I guess I would have expected her to have a cigarette holder, like the evil mastermind in a Disney movie, but she's just using her grubby fingers like the rest of us. I sit down into the chair, evidently waiting for me, and she pushes the pack of cigarettes across to me in a way that makes it feel like the big ante for a poker game. All right, then. I pack the smokes for longer than they need. My brand, somehow. Work the matchbook up from the cellophane and spark up one-handed, holding that delicious smoke in, letting every last molecule of my body have a proper taste before blowing it back out. There's music coming from the speakers, but it's distant, small. You knew she could walk? I finally ask. Cinnamon. Who else? Lena doesn't answer that. Says instead, We didn't. She just said she liked being back in Proofrock, that it made her remember her sister. She was just a house guest. Boat guest. Yacht guest. That movie was her revenge, I say. On all of us. She told Lem it was a memorial, a gift to Proofrock. I hope he's not in trouble for what he did, is he? That drone thing? He didn't know? Lena shakes her head no, says, But how did she get the bears? There. And the chainsaws? Guess she had 4 years to plan, I say. This is something I learned from you, Sheriff. When a killer's in town, then all the killings can just be theirs, can't they? How many? I ask. How many died at the movie? Still counting, Lena tells me, looking down at her hand, like surprised she's smoking again. I don't really want to know how many anyway. It's not about the numbers, it's about the names, the people. But you finished it? Lena finally says, staring at me through the smoke. I mean, Letha did, with what she... I shrug my good shoulder, then shake my head no. Letha didn't finish it. That's what that airboat is about? Lena asks, more perceptive than I would have guessed. I just want to ride with him one more time, I mumble. The sheriff, Lena fills in. You make it sound so... final, she adds. I shrug. Don't tell her that I would be going out on the town canoe, but it's not around anymore. And it doesn't really go fast enough, like that silver bike. Each time the hull touches down, my hand all the way in the throttle, that's going to be another stitch in the open wound this all is. I hope. It's stupid and wishful and little girl, I know. I guess that's who I still am, though, in secret, inside. What's wrong with it? I ask. The airboat. Throttle something, Lena says, wagging her cigarette over the details to show how little they matter. Rodrigo will get it going, if that's what you want. He says the part was already there, under the steering wheel. I nod. That is what I want. Thank you, I tell her. Really. My husband, Lena says, working her lips between her teeth, like massaging these words before letting go. He said this was the most beautiful spot in the world. Did you know that? I shake my head no, I didn't. But I don't disagree. He also said we never should have come here, Lena adds. That we were just messing it up. Again, not wrong. But it's not all on him either. Decades before they got here, Glenn Henderson was killing his best friend and business partner. Remar Lundy was snatching kids and burying them in a pretty little row in his front yard. And a whole town was making a lost little girl live like a cat in the streets. And for a few years before Deacon Samuels pulled into Lonnie's to fill up, they were kind of doing the same to me. They might still, after this night. This time, though, it wasn't me going toe-to-toe with the big bad. So maybe I'm not so much in the spotlight? That's one thing about the slasher, about the final girl. There's got to be a different way, doesn't there? Can't you win in some way that doesn't involve muscles and blood? This isn't Rocky, after all. Or at least, it doesn't have to be. But I do carry the responsibility for a lot of what's gone down in the last day and a half. Well, since Friday the 13th, I guess. Since Hetty and Paul went missing. I can fix it, though, I think. With Rodrigo's help. Can I ask, about the airboat. Lena shrugs, isn't my boss. So I go to the railing, stand by Lemmy over the airboat. How long? I ask. End of the next song, maybe? Lemmy says. Over here I can hear the music better. I turn around, lean back on the rail, study Proofrock across the water, and let the thrashy guitar Lemmy's pushing from his phone wash over me. And then I pick a word out from it. Motorhead. I shake my head, draw deep on my cigarette, blow it out grandly, say, they sing their own name in their song? Didn't know metal bands did that. What? Lemmy says, cocking his head up to the song. Then, oh yeah, this isn't them. Or, this is them, him, anyway, but without the umlaut. Like an acoustic session? Sounds pretty electric to me. No, Lemmy says, reaching across for my cigarette and turning his back to his mom to sneak a quick drag. It's Hawkwind, but it is where the name comes from. It's where it all begins. Last song he ever wrote before they kicked him out, so he named his new band after it. I'm following, but not really listening anymore. It's because what he said there, it won't stop circling that psycho drain in my head, where it all begins. A chill passes over me, from head to what toes I've got left. I push away from the rail, my eyes staring into the distance so I don't lose this. Where it all begins, I say, pushing Lemmy hard in the chest. I rip the cigarette from his lips, draw deep on it, and flick it out onto the lake, past the airboat. Hey, he says. I'm breathing hard, my face flushed, all my cuts and open meat pulsing in the night air. What? Lemmy says, concerned. Where it all begins, I say again. Of course. Of fucking course. Listen, I know how to stop all this, how to end it. We have to go back to where it all started. Mom? Lemmy says, stepping back from me. Lena looks over, angles her face down like watching me over bifocals. I need to go over there, I say to both of them. She turns, studies where I'm pointing, says, Treasure Island? I nod. You sure? Lena asks. I'm still nodding. Almost done down there? Lemmy calls down over the rail, his phone held flat before his mouth like a Star Trek communicator, so he can tell the captain or bridge or wheelhouse what we're doing here. Check, Rodrigo calls back up and fires the airboat's big fan up. Lena's standing beside me now, one elbow chalked in the crook of her other arm. It's a posture the old-time smokers can pull off. Not the first time you've been over there, she feels compelled to say, I guess, so I can know that she knows. I'll pay you back, I mumble, my good hand clamped tight on the railing, my fingertips still not touching each other on the underside. Lena suppresses a smile about me paying her back. Before I can add any more pleas, the airboat turns off. Lemmy says, go, into his phone, and the English Rose, that great nasty girl, starts its big engine. A moment later, the bow swings over, balancing Treasure Island at the tippy point. 2 minutes later, we're there, close enough. Indian Lake's practically a bathtub in a boat this big. This is where it starts? Lemmy asks, disbelief in his voice. It wasn't even here until this summer. The lake, I say. The lake didn't used to be here either. Lemmy watches me, trying to make this make sense. Almost sunup, Lena says, about the horizon glowing orange. No, I tell her standing. It's just before dawn, is what it is. She doesn't get it, but it doesn't matter. I get it. You mind? I ask, lifting the back of my chair a couple inches off the deck. She shakes her head no, not really sure what she's giving me permission to do. So I show her, taking the chair, dragging it slowly to the railing, and, not easy with one arm, hurling it up and over. It falls for a long time, goes under immediately. Do you have cameras down there? I ask. We do now, Lena says. Which one? Lemmy asks, right there with us. He's swiping through screens on a big tablet. When he finds the right one, he angles the screen to me. The chair I threw overboard is right there on Main Street in Drowntown, sitting upright even. That's how good I am. Okay, I say, and walk back for another chair. Drag it to a point a bit farther down the railing. Here, Lemmy says, checking with his mom. She nods, so he picks the chair up like it's nothing, tosses it high. We all watch it slap the water, go under, the lake erasing its entry point fast, like embarrassed by it. On screen, it doesn't even show up. More, I say, and Lena nods in a way that the whole crew shows up. Chairs and tables and whatever they can find arc up over the railing, splash in. Does this move? I ask Lemmy about the camera. He shows me the control pad, top right, so I can angle this underwater camera and its big light over to the church. Just like I knew there would be, there's a hole in the roof now, because little sister doesn't miss when she aims her gun, something Yazzie used to say, from a song I don't think I've ever heard. There's silt everywhere now, from all the stuff we're throwing down there. You really hate that old town, don't you? Lemmy says, impressed. Just one of its people, I tell him. Then, you have mics down there? He scrunches his face, not following. Underwater? He asks. In a lake? Never mind, I tell him, because I know he could throw something together, let us hear. We shouldn't, though. That music I heard, sort of, when I was sliding on the plastic dock at Terra Nova, trying to get the yacht to come back because of Bub. It's the same thing the new founders heard every day they were training to swim the lake. It's the same thing Seth Mullins was hearing on his icy swims. Just jumping in for a few minutes isn't long enough to corrupt you, make you go berserker in a board meeting, or make you bait in bears to massacre a town. But spend some regular time in there, and it gets to you, doesn't it? Well, it does if some idiots poked a hole in the church roof, turning the volume of that choir down there up just loud enough to infect. And if you happen to be dead down there, and have had some bad contact with the shit this place is known for, then your eyes pop open. Your legs start working again. Drowntown's church is the battery powering all this bad shit. It has been, all along, Indian burial ground my ass. This is a Christian burial ground seeping its evil out. And it's also a prison for a certain little someone. It's not working, I say, just out loud. Working? Lena says. The chairs and stuff aren't heavy enough, I say, looking around for a convenient safe, a stray car, maybe a pallet of anvils. We're going to have to ram it, I say with a shrug. It's the obvious next thing. The island? Lena says incredulously. It's still Halloween, I tell her, nodding to the big orange pumpkin about to bob up over the horizon. But not for long. Lena stares at me some more. I won't tell them she was staying here, I say, not making any eye contact. Blackmail doesn't work on me, little miss, Lena says. I nod, probably knew that. There's big fat tears rolling down my face now. Lena's balled fist nudges in under my chin, tilts my face back up so she can look into my eyes. "Why?" she asks. You wouldn't understand." "But you're sure?" "It can all stop," I tell her. All this shit, including what killed about Lemmy, his dad. It's another pie-in-the-sky flying fuck at a rolling donut, but maybe if I believe it enough, right? "I'll pay you back," I mumble again. This makes a little chirp of laughter burst out of Lena that becomes a whole-body chuckle. "God damn it," she says, turning around, sparking up another cigarette to help her deal with this. "Lem, when's sunrise?" Lemmy checks his phone, says, 8 minutes, Ma." Lena nods, does some math in her head, I don't know, and then's barking orders. In maybe 3 minutes flat, her whole crew are bobbing in 2 lifeboats, puttering a safe distance away with the airboat. I go up to the controls with Lena and Lemmy. "Did you really come at Sheriff Allen with a spear gun?" I say on the way. Lena just shrugs, pulls ahead of me. There's final girls everywhere, aren't there? I used to think they were the rarest breed, the finest vintage. But everyone who's got something to fight for, they'll fight for it. Never mind if it's a fight they should win. Should doesn't always matter. What does is that you run screaming into this thing, and don't stop until it's over. Up top in the open air, evidently there's some way to swap the steering controls there, take them away from the windowed-in control room. With 4 minutes left till sunrise, Lena brings the yacht around and backs up. Straight ahead of us, dead in our sights, Treasure Island. "You're sure?" she says. I nod, and she shoves that throttle its whole way up. The yacht doesn't wheelie, but it does dig in enough that I have to grab on. Lemmy's already got my shoulders to keep me from tilting back, one-armed as I am. "Was the shark cool, at least?" he asks, his voice not booming for once. "It was amazing," I tell him, and manage to pat the top of one of his huge hands. "Brace!" Lena orders. And we hit. It stops us hard. Inside, all kind of expensive shit's crashing around. "Again," I tell Lena. She backs up, draws a bead, and fires. Harder this time. Sliding alongside Treasure Island, we can see it's tilting in the water. Something's very broken with it, but it's still not sinking like I need if this is going to work. 2 minutes, I say. Lena nods, accelerates us wide, going farther back, and lines us up again. "All you," she says, giving me the controls. My eyes go wide. "Insurance," she explains. "If I willfully destroy it—" "Got it," I say, and step in, take a wide stance. I am pretty good at destroying shit. Don't know if you've heard. Lena smirks, has to look away to keep her composure. She's to one side of me, Lemmy the other. "Throttle," I tell Lena, because my right arm's in this sling, and she pushes it ahead, turning this up to 11. This time we've got all the speed coming in, big waves rolling away from us, our wake probably epic. The emergency boats out on the lake have taken notice, too, are coming our way, flashing their lights. The people standing in the bow waving their arms like we're crazy people. We are. "Hold on, hold on," Lena says, a sort of grin to her voice to be doing this. And then we hit hard enough to climb the yacht up onto Treasure Island. For a long moment, we balance there. Could tip either way. But then, slowly, by the smallest degrees, our last seconds ticking away, we start to come back down, kind of sideways, water washing thick over the deck, sloshing everything to hell and back, but I run to the downside of the top deck we're on, lean as far over as I can. Treasure Island is sinking, great bubbles roiling to the surface, popping in their oily way. Show me, I tell Lemmy. I don't know if the Wi-Fi, he says, but swipes into the tablet anyway. And the signal's got enough left that in slow motion, the slowest motion ever, we can watch Treasure Island crash down into the church, crushing its waterlogged self. Then everything's blotted out by an enormous mushroom cloud of silt. It blows the camera back, away, but it doesn't matter. I fall to my knees, turn my back to the railing, and hug my shins with my good arm, sobbing into my knees. I messed up the diorama, Mr. Holmes. Hope you don't mind. History doesn't get to stay in place, though. The sirens are winding in from what feels like all around. The sun's coming up, and somewhere a bird's chirping, I think. One more thing now, I tell them, and stand, conjuring my inner Letha, my Jocelyn Cates, my... Say it. My Lena Singleton, hiding in a closet, willing to do anything to save her little boy. Lemmy lowers the ladder down to the airboat the lifeboats have been holding for me. You can drive that thing? He asks, back on the ladder. I grew up here, I say. And moments later, I'm you, Sheriff Hardy. I'm you skipping across all the wakes these emergency boats have kicked up, and they're all yelling at me to stop. But, hey, I've only got one arm, right? I can't steer and turn the engine off both at once, can I? Or something like that. Just like I learned from watching you, Hardy. I skid way up onto the gravel by the pier, and then I walk back down, wait there on shore, the water lapping at my toes. All the emergency boats are attending to the listing English Rose, so I've got time. And everyone from Proofrock's bunched up on the south end of town to Rubberneck, probably just to say they were there at this massacre. This is a ghost town, I mean, in more ways than one. 10 minutes in, the world absolutely silent, the first head crests up from the water. Because this side of the valley is gradual, this dead choir member doesn't stand right up, but surfaces by degrees. And the next one. Carnival of Souls, I say in appreciation. Once I went out onto the lake to lose myself in a movie. Now the movie's coming to me. The choir is waterlogged and rotting, hollow-eyed and sharp-fingered, their throats sung raw and bloody over the decades. But here they are, still dressed in their finest. I sit there, let them shuffle past until... Ezekiel. Because the shepherd is always last. He's tall. I had no idea. Maybe 6.5 feet, up there with the tall man in Little Mike Pearson's nightmares. And his shock of white hair is ragged and wild, his eyes overlarge, and his hands are dinner plates, just like the stories say. He's carrying a soggy Bible in one hand, a Bible that's steaming from the sun touching it, steaming and drying out way too fast. I remember in elementary once, I lost points for not capitalizing Bible, because that's the rule. But even with my second chance, I wouldn't do it. Because there were always crosses around when Indians were being killed, weren't there? Capitalizing that word would make me a traitor. I stand up to block Ezekiel, and he looks down and down to this slight hindrance I am, this annoyance. I'm messing with his holy mission. He's going to convert the world, get them all singing with him. Not anymore, I say, and slide what's left of the golden pickaxe head from my sling. I thought I was just keeping it safe to dispose of later, but now I know just where to put it. Ezekiel sneers down at me and my feeble, broken would-be weapon. "You're not the monster anymore," I tell him, holding that pickaxe by its ragged, blunt end. "I am." With that, I jam the point under his sternum, aiming up for his black heart and then pushing harder, my legs helping me until I'm up on my toes, until my hand's in his vile body, until that point is a bulge in his throat, coming out to nudge hard against his chin, force his whole big head back, keep him from angling that severe look down at me. He wavers with it, wavers from it, his hands grasping uselessly at the part of this pickaxe his fingers can find, and when he falls to a knee in the shallows, all of Proofrock shakes with the impact, and he's close enough to my level now that I can see it, the point that came out at his throat. It's black again. What's gold now are his roomy eyes. They're filming over with it, and it's leaking from his mouth, his nostrils, his ears, the beds of his fingernails, still scrabbling against this pain. "Sermon's over," I tell him, and use my right foot to push him back into the water, out into his own cold box. And it turns out the sharp antlers of Big Daddy, of Rocky, Banner's dad's trophy elk, are waiting right there for him. If they weren't in the shallows, this elk head would just roll away, out from under him. Since they're in 2-3 of water, though, this mount bottoms out fast, its long wooden tines shoving up through Ezekiel's chest, emerging like a great grasping claw from the hollows under his collarbones and then his shoulders. Ezekiel groans, coughs, and that same thin blackness that was in my dad, that was in Jan, and Grayson Bruce, and Ginger Baker, it's pouring out from around the pickaxe. He jerks, one arm reaching, one heel digging in and pushing back, but his body is failing, from the red right hand of an actual Indian, after all these years. Well, okay, left hand, but Wes would get it. When that push Ezekiel started with his heel drifts him far enough out, the top-heavy weight of his body spins him face down all at once, the stump-necked elk rolling into the open air for the first time in years, and the way the murky water streams away from it, for a snapshot of a moment, I see that Banner's concern was right. It looks for an instant like this elk head's got a human body, a man's torso and arms and legs, maybe even a badge glinting in there. Over the next 8 or 10 minutes, Ezekiel and the elk float out into the deeper waters, until Indian Lake slurps them both down. The surface flattens down behind them like a great mother, smoothing the blankets over a sleeping child. I nod about this, breathing hard, and turn to his black mass, his unholy choir. They're all corpses now, will all be, as far as the media knows, bodies washed up from the wreckage of Drown Town. Good. But it's not over yet. Standing on top of the water now, head down, long black hair over her face like some vintage J-horror. No, like some I-horror for Idaho. Is the little girl Ezekiel had trapped in his church. The little girl who was screaming for her mom to come get her. A scream her mom was able to hear once there was a big enough hole in the roof. It's the same hole that let Ezekiel's influence leach out, raise my dad, corrupt Seth Mullins and the new founders, and maybe even get everybody stupid enough to go to the movies. But that could just be us, too. That could just be people, at least in this genre. When there's a party in the slasher, you kind of have to go. Good idea or not, don't you? I mean, I knew better, but there I was just the same, wasn't I? Then Stacy Graves looks up sharply, past me. I turn, my 3 dead fingers suddenly warm, and the angel of Indian Lake is standing there in her dirty nightgown, just as rotted and dead as her little girl, but just as alive, too. Josie Seck. I step back, out of the way, and Stacy Graves raises her arms in that straight-out joyful way little kids have. She rushes across the top of the water, the soles of her feet making little popping sounds, and when she reaches the gravel shore, she keeps running, can run on land, like Christine Gillette said. At least she can when her mom's kneeling down to scoop her up after all these years. Josie Seck stands with her little girl monkeyed onto her, and she breathes a deep breath of mountain air in to be here again. Not Proofrock, not Pleasant Valley, but in the arms of her precious little girl. And I can see from how delicate she is with Stacy that the stories of her snatching kids to nurse into her lost daughter are just campfire tales. She knows who is and isn't her little girl. How could she not? Sure, she might have left berries and dead rabbits for Ginger Baker to keep her alive, and she might have tried to save Jan Jansen from her accidental creation, Grayson Brewst, and they were both different after being too close to her. But that's not her fault. All she wanted to do was help. And in Grayson Brewst's case, when he crashed down into that cave, protect her little girl. With her daughter's face buried in the hollow of her throat, both of them getting less dead moment by moment, touch by touch, Josie Seck turns, walks back into the trees for the last time, her step so precise and small, so happy. She's going the wrong way if she wants to get to the national forest, but when I close my eyes, I can see where she's really headed, up to the highway, to walk alongside the blacktop. Soon enough, a car with a red handprint pressed on the rear fender, because it's a good pony, well, good enough, is going to see her, clock her long black hair, and pull over ahead, wait for her to catch up. It'll be some Indian family headed up to Montana. Crow, Flathead, Blackfeet, Gros Ventre. It doesn't matter. What does is that rear door hanging open, so Josie Seck and her little girl can go home. I nod thank you to the world for this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When I open my eyes again, I'm staring down at the gravel between my knees. A dab of wetness lands on a gray fleck, and I touch my face. Think I must be crying some more without even knowing it. Wrong. I turn my face up to the snow we always get by Halloween, coming down on all the living and the dead, and let it kiss my cheeks, my lips. And so ends this savage history of Proofrock, Idaho, Mr. Holmes. This is my last paper for you, sir. I hope it's good enough.
Baker Solutions, 17 November 2023. Number 76 Zulu 89. Terminal Communication. This concludes the investigation concerning Jennifer Elaine Jade Daniels' vandalism. Attached, please find one piece of material not included previously, as it has no probative value. It's at your discretion whether to deliver it to its intended recipient. As for its provenance, it was misfiled in Directory 3G, Ms. Daniels, Henderson High Records. The postmark is dated 17 February 2013. The intended recipient is Kimberly Daniels. The subject line of this progress report, remarking on Ms. Daniels' classroom efforts, is Slasher 103, in response to the reason for the progress report itself. The course the report is for is world history.
Slasher 103. A copy of this has been filed with the front office per school regulation. Having attempted 4 times to contact you by phone, I thought it prudent to submit this in writing so we can have a happy little paper trail. Your daughter's participation in class, while not obstructive, nevertheless leaves something to be desired. Her pranks, as she calls them, not only take up class time, but could possibly hurt someone if she's allowed to continue. But those disciplinary matters are more the principal's jurisdiction. This classroom is mine. Which brings us to Jennifer's performance on quizzes, tests, and reports. Jennifer is a bright and capable adolescent. I don't need to tell you this. I would even say she's more intelligent than her years suggest, and that she pays closer attention than I usually see in a student her age. You're to be applauded for rewarding this kind of critical thinking in her upbringing. This is exactly the sort of attitude that promotes good citizenship. We need more like Jennifer, I'm saying. However, a mind like hers needs to be directed. Presently, Jennifer's fascination would seem to be the horror film in all its aspects. If she could just apply that same focus to her schoolwork, then I dare say a college scholarship wouldn't be out of reach, especially if she's a first-generation student. Her Native American ancestry could only help with that application. Were Jennifer to improve her course grade by semester's end, then I could be persuaded to write a letter on her behalf, even. What I mean to impart is that I believe in your daughter, Mrs. Daniels. I see in her an aspect of myself at her age, if I can be so bold. She would buck authority given the chance, and she would push back against the norms of a society that does indeed need to be better, to do more. Who knows, your daughter could someday hold public office and change policy, thus directing the world onto a better course. The sky's the limit with this one. But I fear that this fascination she has with these horror movies might end up siphoning energy best directed elsewhere. As example, I append her Xerox of the most recent attempt at extra credit titled Slasher 101, as if she were the teacher, not me, and suggesting that I can only now expect a Slasher 102 and on and on. While your daughter may indeed someday replace me in my generation, as it should be, I warrant that adopting this pose at her age might result in more resistance than we would want for her. I should comment on the content of that extra credit paper as well. In it, as you can read, she's on a dock, which I take to be our local pier, and she's watching a boy drowning out in the lake, and everyone from town is there with her, and we're all just watching, Miss Daniels. But your daughter, in this extra credit paper that was supposed to be on Greek drama and thought, as masks were worn in ancient drama, Jennifer uses that as a stepping stone to get to her movies. She's the only one of all of us to dive in and swim out to this boy and bring him back to land. While I honor the heroic effort and the self-sacrifice, what concerns me is the indictment your daughter is making about Proofrock, ma'am. Why, of all the adults and law enforcement officers and teachers, she even places some counselors from Camp Winnemucca over there. She is the only one to recognize this child in distress. Of note, too, is the tourist she places as part of that crowd, whom I take to be an actual tourist she encountered on the pier or in town. She says he's the Brad Wesley type, if that happens to be a friend or relation. This tourist has a bag of golf clubs hooked over his shoulder, the way your daughter writes him, and an expensive camera dangles around his neck, and Lonnie from the gas station would seem to be chaperoning him. I mentioned him only to draw attention to the fact that you might want to better monitor your daughter's perambulations around town, as she might encounter strangers who are here today, gone tomorrow. I see bright things for her. I mean, the world is hers if she wants it. She's smart, she's curious, and if she would only apply herself as much to schoolwork as she does to her other hobbies and interests, then the sky's not even the limit for her. Having seen a lot of children pass through my classroom, including you and your former husband, I can say without hesitation, no insult intended, that Jennifer Daniels has just about the most potential of any of them. Had I ever had children of my own, I would be lucky if one were even half as curious and intelligent and feisty as Jennifer. If you wish to discuss your daughter's performance in world history any further, I am at your disposal. Grady Holmes.
The New Blood. 2 days into November, the last girl standing sits on the bench by the lake for lunch. She's smoking a cigarette, ashing into the palm of her hand, and thinking hard on everything. Her right arm is a Frankenstein arm, but the stitches will heal, and the bone was only bruised, and it's not like she cares about scars. Scars prove you lived. That's what her girlfriend in prison used to always say, and will again in 6 years, when she gets out. The girl, no longer shaking from missed meds, can wait. She breathes her smoke in deep and holds it, and tracks one of the folded paper boats bobbing in the surf. Behind her, Main Street is pretty much trashed. The elk who swam the lake to get away from the fire came up by the pier snorting and scared. Instead of running up the mountain, they gored and kicked, stomped and screamed, venting their anger for how these two-leggeds keep messing the valley up. Run On, the girl with the temporary pink streaks in her long black hair, says every time she passes one of the broken windows, the cars with their hoods stomped in, the former sheriff's tall brown truck, parked where he left it when he crossed the lake for the last time. The reason no one's fixing Main Street yet is that they're all in the woods under the dam. There's a little girl lost out there, and a media empire's put up a cash reward staggering enough to draw treasure hunters in from all over the world. How they know she's out there is that the girl who smokes cigarettes on this bench finally checked the social media feed on her best friend's phone and saw a blurry recording of the moment the lost girl's abductor encountered a blurry woman in white in the woods and dropped the girl, scuttled away. Because of the reward, Proofrock's a tourist destination again. The forest is clogged with people night and day. Once again, the side of the mountain at night is flickering with sudden pinpoints of light. The paper boats bobbing under the pier used to be for the boy lost in the lake, but now they're for this little girl who's also lost. So far, all that's been found out in the trees are the remains of a game warden, his pale foot and a hiking boot by a long-dead white bronco anyway, and a dehydrated, grateful helicopter pilot with the bluest eyes, but no little girl. What they haven't found is a rotted, sagging cabin in the woods, under a lean-to formed by a giant tree that fell years ago. But there were pockets of fire all over the valley on Halloween, weren't there? There definitely were. Maybe one of those floating embers landed on that cabin, burned it to the ground, its charcoal timbers falling into the crater that opened up under it. In the trash can in the faculty lounge of the high school are 16 thumbtacks with big reflective heads, and because this is a school, nobody will ever question arts and crafts getting thrown away. The girl with the loose front tooth that's starting to tighten up bumps the player on her phone back a voice memo, listens again through her earbuds. Her best friend's trial won't start for months, she knows, but that best friend can make it through whatever now that she knows her little girl's not in the ground. What this girl with the blackest lungs also knows is that, since there's no body proving what's on that recording actually happened, well, with the right lawyers, with the right storied firm, maybe this best friend gets to come home before her daughter goes back to school. Stranger things have most definitely happened. The girl who made a promise to that best friend earlier this morning through the bars of a cell blows her smoke out, lets it dissipate, then stands, squinting across the bright water. What she's looking at are the empty houses over there. They're full of ghosts, will never be lived in now. And in 10 years, after the children's campus finally crumbled to the ground, that stand of homes over there will be the new place to drink beer around a bonfire and lead someone by the hand into this or that house. And this is how people move into the future, holding hands, smiling not because everything's going to be perfect, but because now is anyway. That's all you can ask for, really. The reason this girl who used to cry in the band closet of her high school is sitting on the bench and smoking cigarette after cigarette down to the filter instead of walking the woods for the lost girl is the package that was waiting on her porch the morning after it all happened. She hadn't opened it until about 3 hours ago. Another videotape. She stalked from room to room of her house almost until lunch, telling herself not to watch it and telling herself she had to. Finally, she did. The opening frames took her breath away. A lake that could be her lake. The camera just drifting along shore. The movie is by an Italian director at the height of his power, straddling the giallo and the slasher. Once upon a childhood, the girl whose life needed saving found this exact tape in the bargain bin of a gas station, and she's held it close to her heart ever since. And that it's found its way back to her is staggering as a fairy tale. But then the tape fizzed, lost tracking, a different speed engaging, and the girl who knows this movie by heart almost stood in anger that somebody could have done this. What if this was a recording of the lost girl, though? The girl who could recite that recorded over movie by heart sat back down, perched on the very front edge of her couch, her hands holding each other between her knees, the fingers worrying, tight. It wasn't the lost girl on the tape. What it was a bit of footage recovered from 2015. Years ago, a disturbed girl in a hospital room had told her about this, but also suggested it was gone forever, sunk along with everything else. What's lost can be found, though. It's black and white, and steady enough that it has to be a trail camera or something rigged to act like one. At first, it's just a shoreline at night, but then, for 8 exquisite seconds, a ragged little girl with long black hair runs up to the edge of the water from the lake and definitely picks something shiny up, a piece of tinsel, and runs back out, her feet making small little splashes in the surface. This is the proof the girl who's never had proof needs to make all her lies true. The return address on the padded envelope the tape was in isn't an address at all. It's just the letters C and B, the second letter nested in the first, like it's being consumed. The girl whose hair wasn't bright pink yet then knelt down in front of her VCR like worship, closed her eyes, and found the eject button without looking. She stood with the tape, flipped the cover back, and slowly at first, but then fast like ripping off a Band-Aid, she unwound this perfect movie that had saved her life, the iridescent videotape spooling around her feet, and her breath was hitching and her eyes were hot, but this was right, she knew. This was the way it had to be. After that, she went to the dollar store, its plate glass windows plywood now. The girl with the DVD scar above her right eye stood at the register for 3 minutes before the only worker not out in the woods sashayed down the aisle. In the pockets of his red apron was Christmas already. He was stocking it. "How's your grandpa doing?" the girl whose name is one letter from this clerk's asked. "Dias buenos y dios malos," the clerk said with a shrug that meant thanks for asking. In a small town, you know everyone. That too, the girl without a mom said about the little red nutcracker the worker had been about to hang up because it reminded her of a Christmas movie she likes. One with arrows and axes and hammers. She paid for it in the double clearance spray-on hair coloring from the Halloween aisle. The nutcracker is sitting on the bench now, beside this girl who barely made it through Halloween. "Keep guard," she says down to him, but he's unperturbable. Can't be bothered to respond, just stares straight ahead with his painted eyes. She leaves him there, scratches her head because the spray-on stuff is itchy and pretty much sucks. Double clearance was about twice too much. For a moment, the girl who has an emergency room undercut on the right side now, for the monster line of stitches she thinks might make a good centipede tat someday, considers the stand of trees behind her. But instead of forging into them for the lost girl, she nods to them like later and hikes the long way up to the nursing home to finally keep the promise she made all those years ago, to come see someone. Her hope is that if she can keep this promise, then maybe she can keep all her promises. In the old woman's room, the girl who never had a grandmother sits and listens, wraps the old woman's Afghan better around her shoulders, and offers her water, but the old woman says that's still not the girl's job. When the girl with the powdery pink hair scratches her scalp one too many times, the old woman directs her to the sink in the kitchenette. The girl who's not supposed to get her stitches wet leans over it. The faucet is high and arching like a swan neck or the ghost of a swan boat. Lets the old woman wash the pink from her hair, massaging her scalp with her ancient fingers. She can walk on land, you were right, the girl who saw it says, but it's lost in the sound of the spray and the suds. After, the girl who's never had her hair washed like this before is sitting in the windowsill with a towel wrapped around her head when the old woman wheels back into the room with what she said was going to be a surprise. It's hair dye, the good kind. What color? The girl with her head in a towel asks. We'll see, the old woman says, shaking the bottle. I'll come see you again, the girl who means it promises afterward, kneeling in front of the old woman's wheelchair, holding these 2 tissue paper hands in her own. Is it over, finally? The old woman asks. The girl who can't lie about this lowers her head. Almost, she says. It's almost over. It's what leads her back to the parking lot at the end of Main Street, to the gravel that's the shore of the lake she grew up on. The great brown truck her friend the sheriff used to drive is still there, parked across the yellow lines. It's mid-afternoon now, already, somehow. The little girl lost in the woods has been 2 days without food, and the game warden's pasty white foot in that boot isn't giving anyone hope. But the reward doesn't specify, dead or alive. The girl who's an aunt now shakes her pack for one last smoke, but she's out. This is funny to her. She peels the pull tab all the way off now that this pack's empty, and threads that strand of foil into her hair, runs it behind her ear, where it feels right. Then she tucks the empty pack into the back pocket of her torn jeans, dials up one of the voice memos again. This one's about her, but it's to the little girl. The mom's voice in it is hitching, sort of crying, but not really. She's standing against the outside wall of a big house in the most beautiful snowstorm, she's telling her daughter. And she doesn't have long hair, but she wants the little girl to know about her Aunt Jade, that she's supposed to go to her if she ever needs anything, that Aunt Jade will always be there for her, that... Does the little girl know about Jade, the pretty, green, precious stone? That the only way to test it is to hit it with a hammer? If it shatters, then it's real. What the mom tells her daughter in the voice memo is that that's how her Aunt Jade is. That life has tested her over and over with its big hammer, that it's shattered her time and again, proven her real. But Aunt Jade pulls herself back together each time. That's the thing about her. You can hit her over and over and she'll just look up at that hammer coming down. She'll look up, take a drag on her cigarette, and sneer her lip up. And that's why the little girl should always run to Aunt Jade. Run to her, run to her. She's the mom's sister in her heart. She's her best friend for forever. The mom's gladder than anything that she moved to this town on this mountain, because if she hadn't, she never would have made this friend. Run to me, the girl who never knew that about Jade says, and rubs the stitches in her shoulder, leaves her fingers there because it feels like she's holding herself together. When the old woman saw one of her ears mostly gone under the new stubble, she just tisked, then arranged the girl with these voice memos hair over it. The girl with the hair that had been pink, though, she shook that hair off, daring the world to stare, because fuck them. The old woman had nodded about this and tried to take a drink from her empty mug. I don't have any spit, she said, like that was a funny thing. It's a line from one of the girl with the bright blue hair's favorite movies of all time, and she walked away listening to it over and over. Run to me, the girl whose sunken island says in her head now. She's saying it because she remembers the lost girl running out to her dad's truck when he'd honk, so he could sweep her up in his arms, swing her around and around. The little girl knows the sound of that horn. That's what the girl who never got a driver's license is thinking when she climbs in behind the wheel. Maybe if she drives all around the lake honking the horn, the lost girl finds her, right? It's not like anything else is working so far. This girl with her record as long as her arm reaches around the steering wheel to start this big truck, figure out how to drive it while driving it, but no key? Figures. She checks the console, the glove compartment, the little cubby in the dash, and then, because this worked once for a robot from the future, she pops the visor down, opens her hand for the keys to fall into her palm. They don't. What does flutter down, though, is a piece of construction paper with a lost girl's drawing on it of the sheriff and his wife and the girl, their family. The girl who never had that presses her lips together to keep her eyes from spilling, holds that drawing hard to her chest, her breath's coming deep now. Putting that picture back, then, it's not hers. She sits up straighter in the seat. This drawing might not be hers, but another one is. 2 minutes later, the girl who's only ever wriggled out the bathroom window of the sheriff's office is climbing in through that window. The drawing is still in the ceiling, right where she left it. The girl who made the promise falls hard to her knees. Moments later, she's rushing through the front office, not answering the questions the girl behind the desk is calling out. The drawing is of the lost girl in a cove just off the lake, with a funny tree behind it. The old sheriff, years ago, giving the girl who didn't even know horror then's third-grade class a tour, had pointed a tree out for them that looked like the one in this drawing, and said that in the old days, the cowboy days, Indians used to tie a tree into a funny shape when it was young, so it would grow up crooked like that. Be a good landmark they could use for years and years. This is that tree. And this was just a school day, and the whole class wouldn't fit in the old sheriff's airboat, so the girl who remembers everything, even the stuff she doesn't want to, rushes to shore out of breath. No one's there with her. They're all out looking for the lost little girl. But that little girl's not over in the woods behind the dam where everyone's looking. That's just where she got lost. The confused mother who ran her abductor off and knew not to hold this girl, she led her, herded her, somehow got the little girl back over here, didn't she, to keep her safe? That has to be why that mother was over here by the pier the very next morning. It has to be. The girl who's seen all the movies and knows all the rules nods yes about this, definitely, for sure. Cut to that little girl, playing at the water's edge by a funny-shaped tree. She's guiding a forked branch back and forth on the surface and making boat sounds with her mouth. When the branch gets away from her, she balances out on a rotting log to get it. But when she looks behind that log, she sees an even better toy, a paper boat. And there's more coming in and more, a whole little fleet of them. The little girl doesn't know it, but if your boat makes it all the way across to the other side, your wish is supposed to come true. The girl might have wished for someone to play with, please. It comes true anyway. When the second and third paper boats drift into the branches of the fallen down tree she's balancing on, she squats down to try to reach them, keep them safe, then jerks back. Bobbing there right by the log is a very dead grown-up girl, her skin rotting away, a small brown bird sitting on her forehead, shoving its tiny beak deep into her eye socket. This young alive girl watches the dead older girl and watches her some more, waiting for her to do something. The bird keeps eating, doesn't want to give up its find. I'm going to go over here, the girl finally tells the dead girl, and then she waits to see if the dead yellow-haired girl is going to nod or shake her head no. When the dead girl doesn't do anything, the alive girl wades away, only looking back once to be sure the dead girl hasn't set up. On shore again, the alive girl steers the 2 paper boats she has through the tall grass and then pushes one of them out into open water again but doesn't follow, doesn't want to get wet because wet is cold at night and it'll be dark again before too long. She does track the little boat though. It drifts into a pair of legs clad in thrashed out denim. The younger girl looks up those legs, finds a girl with electric blue hair, with tattoos up and down her arm, with a silver stud through her eyebrow, and eyes that won't stop staring back at her, lips that are pressed tight together. She squats down too, to inspect this boat. What do we want to call this one? She asks. Credible Hulk, the girl says, because of course. And then she realizes that this girl with a chainsaw heart isn't standing in the water, she's standing on it. It's from the way her fingers got bitten into once. It infected her blood with the lake and made her like this, which she only figured out when she stepped out into some frozen cold water once to try to save an old sheriff from sinking down and found the water wouldn't take her anymore. It's wet now, the girl standing on the water says about the boat and shrugs, reaches back into her pocket for another sheet of white paper. She folds it into a perfect boat, just like all the rest. The little girl presses her lips together, doesn't want to smile about this, but can't help it. Her eyes dart over to the dead girl in the water. I think she's from the Netherlands, the girl who doesn't fear the Reaper anymore says. She came here with her boyfriend when I was in high school. Is she okay? The little girl asks. We'll tell someone about her, the girl trying not to smile too much says, so she can finally go home, be with her parents. This makes the little girl's lip tremble, her chin prune up. It's gonna be okay, you know, the girl who's an aunt says. It probably doesn't seem like it, but it really will be. The little girl nods, not really following, just watching. The rest of the paper boats are turning sideways with wetness now, foundering, going down to the little boy who needs them. Do you want to try? The girl with trembling fingers asks, holding a sheet of paper out. The little girl considers this, then nods twice, fast. A really old sheriff taught me how to do this, the girl who knows all the history says, making the first fold. This is the shark fin, at top. Can't see, the little girl says, tippy-toeing. The girl who's actually a woman now, a history teacher even, holds her hand out, sideways, the way adults do. I know a place over there we can sit and make all of these we want, she says, tilting her head across the lake to the meadow shaped like the head of a sheep. It's where your mom and me watched our first movie together. The younger girl presses her lips together and nods twice, then nods faster and steps in up to her knees, splashes out as fast as she can, arms held high to be caught. The woman who remembers being that young and that trusting takes her by the hand, then swings her around, up onto her waist, onto the surface of the water with her, and then the real angel of Indian Lake walks out into the glittering brightness. She walks on top of the water until she can't wait anymore, which is when she starts running. Acknowledgements. A few years back, doing a book festival back in my hometown of Midland, Texas, I ended up with the night to myself. All I had to do was take the back way around the lobby, slip out to my rental car, and roll away with my headlights off. Where I was going, the drive-in west of town, that had always been closed when I was growing up. This could even be where my aunt and uncle saw Halloween, like I talked about here a time or two ago. That's what I was here for this night. There's something about watching it through your windshield, isn't there? Like back in 1978. It had been a long day of shaking hands and signing books and trying to sound halfway smart, and being worried who was and wasn't going to walk through the door, though. I was spent. And it was just me in that rental car, so I sort of drifted off. Was in and out pretty much after they find that dog Michael snacks on that no one ever speaks about. But gently waking every few minutes to Lori and Michael and Loomis, man, I'm not even sure I've ever woken up. I might still be there in that rental car. I mean, only now I'm dreaming about a girl who changes her hair color every week. A girl whose heart's too big for her body. A girl who fights monsters and then forgets how to walk if too many people are looking at her at once. I didn't get to just write one book with Jade. I mean, I got to write 3. If that's not the dream, then I don't know what is. It's taught me so much about character, about friendship, about world building, about maps, about this long narrative undulation we call plot, but it's really maybe life, I think. It also showed me, once again, what my few strengths and many weaknesses are, kind of writ large across these 3 books. It doesn't mean I'll play to those strengths from here on out. I hope it means I'll run at those weaknesses, because that's what you do if you want to get better. I also learned that the cool thing about trilogies is you get to use every last part of the buffalo. Or what I learned about the 3rd installment in a trilogy is that your orders, the orders I heard anyway, are to mash that pedal to the floor until it gets stuck, and then hold on the best you can, dude. That's 100% what writing this one was like. I had no idea where it was going or how it was going to get there, but I knew it had to be shriekier and gorier than the 2 that came before, which had already been pretty over the top. I knew I couldn't protect the deck crew either, which wasn't going to feel good. But what you do to your characters, it's not supposed to feel good. It's how you get to the good. Except, of course, for the first time in years, concerning a novel project, I was scared. So I did what you do. With 5 months to write this novel, which is pretty gracious, I sat down and wrote another novel. I was a teenage slasher. It was my way of clearing my head. of making sure the tank was absolutely empty before starting this one, so I'd have to come up with some other nightmare fuel. Teenage Slasher took 2 of those allotted 5 months, though, meaning when I finished it on a Tuesday, I had to open a new blank document Wednesday morning, get started on this book, still with no premise, no voice, no real idea what to do. I'd done this once before, sort of, and ended up with Growing Up Dead in Texas, and I guess this is kind of how Mongrels happened, and the long trial of Nolan Dugatti, and mapping the interior, so I knew if I held my lips just right, if I counted taps onto everything within reach in just the right order, I could maybe get lucky, pull some acceptable rabbit out of the hat. But, too, there's always a chance that hat chews my arm off this time. Novels are like that, aren't they? Writing them, I mean. The long road to the reader's heart is lined with the husks of writers' novels have left behind, the skeleton frames of burned-out Chevrolets, indeed. Speaking of, thanks again to Yerba Mate energy drinks, the pineapple coconut ones. Without you, I have to invent you in order to write these 3 books that are my beating heart. And special thanks to my agent, BJ Robbins, who realized I wasn't going to just be having to burn the candle at both ends to make this deadline. I was going to have to light sticks of dynamite to see my way to the last page. She called my editor at Saga, Joe Monty, and got that deadline moved. This is early June. Both BJ and Joe knew I could make the deadline as it had been, because I don't miss my deadlines, but, Joe said, he wanted to be sure this 3rd book in the trilogy could wrap everything up right, so he wanted to be sure I had whirled enough in time to get that done. Which means, of course, expectations, Steve. But that kind of pressure's fun. So suddenly, thanks to the kindness and trust of BJ and Joe, I had until September. Talking 6 extra weeks here. What I promptly did then, as you do, was take 3 weeks completely off just to goof around on the trails, gallivant around the world, read a lot of books and comics. This after I'd already started the prologue, too, which is a dangerous game to play, turning your back on a novel, because sometimes it never lets you back in. But this 3rd book, man, that's all it was at every stage, the most dangerous game. And I think what I was most scared of was, I'm going to say it, was I still a horror writer, even? Every time out, the novel teaches you a lot about yourself, I knew that, but I wasn't sure I wanted to have to question my identity. Why I was? It was that Savage History prologue, which was the single hardest section of this whole trilogy to write. The reason, I was 2 or 5 pages into it when the Uvalde shooting happened. Remember how, right after Columbine, a lot of the horror movies got dialed back, violence-wise? I never understood that until now, even though one of my brothers had been put into a coma in the cafeteria at Columbine well before the shooting. I mean, after seeing Uvalde on the news like that, I was just walking around with my hands in my hair because the world didn't make sense. Nothing would make sense. How can stuff like this even be? All of us were there for a while, weren't we? How can you not be? This is not a thing that should happen. Fiction's always been my retreat from the mad and maddening world, though. The place I can hide. The place where, if I can get all these spinning plates balanced just right, things can make sense for a few pages. So I came back to Hetty and Paul, sitting in that entryway of the library. But they're the couple at Lover's Lane up front in the slasher, aren't they? If that's not a death sentence, I don't know what is. I was genre-bound to kill them, so their blood could grease the gears of the story, establish the mortal stakes, show that anybody and everybody's in the victim pool, all that. But it's turned out to be so hard to do now, and it never had been before. This is why Here Comes the Boogeyman is the longest prologue of this trilogy. These kids, these students, they weren't disposable. I couldn't dispose of them anyway. Way later in the book, when Jade, the teacher, is hugging her student Alex to her so hard, so desperately, and her world's just crumbling all around her, that's this whole book to me. A lot of characters have died in the course of this trilogy, and in this book specifically. I'm not sure any of them hurt as much to write as Paul and Hetty that last week of May. And even then, after the prologue was over, I still couldn't let Hetty and Paul go. I never planned for Hetty's documentary to play up on the side of the dam. I didn't even know there was going to be a movie. How could there be after Jaws on the Water? But when playing it meant a dream of hers could sort of come true in spite of everything, that meant I had to come up with someone to steal that bulky video camera, which meant that had to be someone with reasons to do that, and Cinnamon Baker in the Quint spot at the back of the room upped her chin sure about this. Before I could even call on her to ask what she had planned, she'd already left to do it. She's not the kind to, as Mike Birbiglia says, wait for the second half of sentences. I didn't even know she was under that Father Death hood on the swings until way late in the game, and I was equally surprised to find her contributing to those reports. And it turned out to be so completely lucky that her throat had taken some damage last time around. Otherwise, why doesn't Jade just clock who she is right away? But this is how novels happen for me. I plan, I strategize, I anticipate, and the story does what it's going to do anyway, never mind the dude here at the keyboard. It's not all just stumbling in the darkness, though. Or, okay, it is, it always is, I don't know how else to do it, but I'm lucky to have people standing out in that, as Richard Kadrey might phrase it, grand dark, to lead me from point to point. This time, Jesse Lawrence and Matt Serafini and Adam Cesar were there to help with some chapter titles when I was about halfway through and thinking this naming convention was flaming out. Thanks as well to Mackenzie Chiara for burning through this one and asking some very hard questions that made this one different on rewrite. Thanks to a talk I had with Josh Viola, a version of which showed up here. Without permission, I guess. Josh, this okay? Ish? Mark it out if not. Anyway, Josh, as thanks for that talk, as thanks for trusting me, I put Casey Jones in here. I'm guessing you got that tat of him by the time this is out. Thanks to Don Henley for his line, "You call someplace paradise, kiss it goodbye." Though I've never been able to tell if Henley's line applies to Native America or to the invaders. I think it's to them, maybe, as we only ever called this place home. It only becomes paradise in the rear view. But Don Henley also says that if you find somebody to love in this world, you better hang on tooth and nail, which is Jade in 16 words, pretty much. Thanks also to Paul Tremblay for coming up with our main character in this YA novel we did together a few years back. I think the Jade who's in this book shares a thing or two with her. Or I don't think she'd be who she is here without me getting to co-write a girl named Mary. So in thanks, and with permission, there's a Paul title in the story. Thanks again to Theo Van Alst for letting me use your name in these books. To show my gratitude, I may have put a few umlaut-associated things in this book specifically for you. It was supposed to be this big surprise, but then I needed help getting them right, which you were there for last minute. Your help let this whole thing come together. Thanks so much. And talking music, thanks again and still to Adam Bradley for answers to my random Tupac questions. Hope I did him justice, or at least didn't mess anything up. And thanks to that old animated song or music video or whatever it is, Ultimate Showdown of Ultimate Destiny. It was my pole star for the last third of this book. Thanks to a Louise Erdrich story from The New Yorker about that head rolling around. I think it was a New Yorker. And thanks even more to her for Nanapush, I think, in Tracks, who straps moose meat all over himself. That's such an indelible image that I had to snake it. And even more thanks to Louise Erdrich for starting Love Medicine in third person for June, whom I've dedicated at least one book to, maybe more, but then shifting into first so easily, so naturally. You doing that gave me permission to do that here. Thanks as ever to Joe R. Lansdale, too. First, for everything, for being the writer and person I try to model myself on. Second, for always talking Neanderthals with me at any time of day or night. But, talking this novel, thanks for a nervous breakdown you gave Hap a few books ago. That really hit me and stayed with me and told me that the first time we see Jade here, maybe she's dealing with some stuff like that as well. Also, for the longest time, this novel had a big mess up in it that I only figured out by asking myself, what would Joe do here? Answer, he wouldn't cheat. So I had to be honest, find a real way to get through to the end, not a fake way I hope nobody would catch. Thanks to that Run Brothers Buffalo poem with a long title that I cannot find anymore. Does anybody know it? If so, tell me so I can put it in the acknowledgments of the paperback of this. As well as you, whoever tells me. Thanks to Mike McCoven for Fantastic Land, the horror novel I've read the most times the last decade. To show my true and abiding love for that perfect book, I smuggled a line from it into this book. Thanks to Anurag Andra for talking Good Will Hunting with me enough that my favorite part of it found its way onto the pages here. Thanks to Devin Broyles for that birds in the hair thing. And thanks to Danny Broyles for always talking horror, for knowing so much of it, and always having it on instant Rolodex. And thanks also for saving my life so many times. I don't write any of these books if I'm not around, right? Thanks also to Bret Easton Ellis for that last lyrical blast-off at the end of Leonard Park. I knew I couldn't do that same thing here, but with some different tricks, I could maybe pull something halfway similar off. And thanks again, I think, to Nelson Taylor for that "do not eat fish from these waters" bit. Remember that line you wrote in grad school, Nelson? Kicking like Clydesdales up the limestone steps of Kansas City. That's burned on my soul, man. I can never forget it. We had no idea what to do with that line, still don't, but it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Thanks to my mom as well, for forever haunting dams up for me and my brothers. Remember how you would close your eyes and scream the whole way across all the dams we found ourselves on, with us all leaning over the seat, yelling left, left, right? That feeling of knowing we were about to fly off the side into a few seconds of silence, it's definitely here. There's a deer and a fence in this book too, which I owe to William J. Cobb, even though you've told me you don't remember that story, Bill. If you ever do, man, would I love to read it again. There's a broke down old cabin in here that I'm pretty sure I sort of stole from James Welch's Winter in the Blood, too. Or this cabin comes into the story at about the same place yours does, sir. Thanks, too, to Joe Hill for giving his fireman and the fireman a Halligan. Been waiting for the chance to use that tool. Thanks also to Bruce Springsteen. I stole a line from your latest Broadway stint, man. Sorry, it was too good not to. Thanks also to Monk for Sharona. I like Natalie, don't get me wrong, she's great, but for Jade and Letha, Sharona was a better fit. Thanks to one of my brothers, Sky, for teaching me about JPay, even though neither of us really wanted to have to learn it. Thanks to Candace, Phineas and Ferb's big sister, for a certain emphasis in here. Thanks to a used-up Kona Hey Hey and a shiny new Ibis Ripmo AF, the two bikes I rolled the wheels off of, writing this. That's what my days were, the summer of the Angel of Indian Lake. A few hours at the keyboard, then 20 or 30 miles up and down the trail to figure out what comes next. Without those two bikes, I don't know if I get this book done, as it takes too long to reset without all those miles, all those pedal strokes. Thanks to the poetry anthology Vital Signs, edited by Ronald Wallace, you were the first book of poetry I ever read. I was 19. My favorite poems in there are still all marked, and each of them is such a huge part of my writer DNA now. First among them is a poem by John Chardy. It's about emeralds, but I've been remembering it differently for 30 years now, and it's sort of too late to change a certain character's name. Emerald Daniels just doesn't sound right. And of course, I think I really owe Doug Crowell, my first writing teacher, for assigning that book of poems and talking about them like they were so full of meaning, of heart, of the world. They were, Doug. They were, and they still are. I honestly don't know if I ever take writing seriously without you talking about these poems with us like that. Teachers, man, they can be the butterfly who flaps its wings, starts the hurricane, can't they? I've been so lucky to have been in the wash of so many of those butterflies, I think. I'm so lucky for this storm I'm standing in, I mean. But I'm not standing in it alone. Joe Monty, my editor at Saga, is there with me. Without him, man. Without Joe's steady pencil and chainsaw, there's no trilogy. And without his input here on Angel, I think I finally maybe take the easy way out and let myself cheat. Joe keeps me honest, though. Without him, none of this. And without Christine Colella, Savannah Breckenridge, and Bianca Ducassi getting Angel in so many write-ups and lists in magazines and newspapers and sites and more, Angel could have been a drop in the ocean no one heard. Thank y'all so much. Also, thanks for running my life and scheduling me. I sure couldn't do that. Thanks also to Steve Breslin and the copy editing and production teams for keeping this all going. Thanks as well to the recent Baywatch movie. You taught me something about backstory that I used in this book. Please, nobody ask me what that is. Not because it's secret or embarrassing, but because I don't remember. Writing novels, just because I'm paranoid about not thanking someone, I keep a little scratch pad of who and where I'm stealing from. This is how Demon Theory got nearly 500 footnotes. And really early on in the list I'm consulting right now is just that. Baywatch, for how to do backstory. I don't know. I really don't. I do watch that movie a lot, though, because it's perfect. I do remember that I stole from Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning at the last possible moment, though. So happy I took a couple hours away from revisions to go see a Tom Cruise movie. Thanks to the Books in the Freezer podcast, too. After gisting there, Stephanie Gagne let me add one song, Aretha, of course, to the Books in the Freezer Final Girls playlist. When I was writing the first Jade chapter of this, I found that the playlist I'd used for Chainsaw and Reaper no longer worked. I think because this was first person now. Or maybe playlists just get used up, I don't know. Anyway, I dialed up this Books in the Freezer Final Girls playlist, used it for a few pages, but then ended up stealing some of its tracks and progression, deleting this and that song, adding a few more, and in a day or two I had the playlist that burned me through this novel and kept it from going stale. I think by playing songs I would never have thought to include. But then, for the last 2 chapters when I was needing to bring everything home, it was that old playlist that got me there. Well, that old playlist in great heaping handfuls of sixlets mixed with pecans. I always come up with big reasons why I write, but sometimes I wonder if it's not just to eat sixlets with pecans and then ride my bike really hard. But as for why pecans? Growing up, my grandparents, who always lived in the same place, unlike us, had pecan trees around their house. On Saturday mornings, I'd watch cartoons and eat pecans until I was throwing up sick. And man, what I wouldn't give to go back, do that again, just one more time. So pecans get me there a little bit. Look up the cover of Growing Up Dead in Texas, maybe? That's my brother and me, the 2 kids from Mapping the Interior, standing out in those pecan trees, just trying, as Jamie Johnson says, to save each other, to survive. A big part of me is still there, I think. And I said it was scary having no ideas for this 3rd installment, but having to write it anyway. But I mean, I did have Indian Lake and Proofrock and Terra Nova and Camp Blood and Drowntown already, and of course I had Jade. And instead of speaking in courier this time, she was getting to tell the main parts. Can't say that it was all my idea, though. Across the 8 years it took for My Heart is a Chainsaw to come together, all my early readers kept telling me the novel was sort of alright so long as that Jade girl was narrating. But when Hardy and Letha take over, it kinda sucks then, dude. That told me that, this time out, Jade was taking the mic, that she was the only one who could bring it home. So, Jade, thank you for fighting through. Thank you for letting me write about you. After this, I'm looking away from you. I'm letting you go on without me, into the world, into the life you deserve. Don't let go of Holmes and Hardy and that idiot football player from history class. They're part of you. But also cling tight to Letha and your little niece. Raise her into the fiercest final girl Proofrock's ever seen, which is saying something. And be at that bus stop when Yazzie gets off. She'll be nervous in all this open space, but you can lead her into it bit by bit, I think. Take her out to the pier, maybe, to Melanie's bench, and just be there with her. That's what we need the most, I think. Who I sit on that bench with is my wife, Nancy. Nan, remember that preacher who married us when we were, 23? After we'd already been together 4 years? Before he did the ceremony, he pulled me aside like a test to ask me one thing about you that made me know you were the one for me. It was a weird out-loud quiz to get last minute, but I had an answer right off, too. What I told him that day, Nan, was that if you ever see someone in an aisle at a grocery store grabbing their kid's arm too hard, then no matter the size or scariness of this person, or what the fallout might be for you personally, no matter if the whole world comes crashing down because of this, you'll be right in that person's face about them grabbing their kid like that, and you won't be backing down. I write about final girls a lot, yes. I think that might be because I live with one. Can't think of any other person I'd rather be in this fight with. Now here, let's just watch the lake together, if you will. I think I see someone out there on the water. Stephen Graham Jones, Boulder, Colorado, 17 September, 2022.
The Angel of Indian Lake was written by Stephen Graham Jones and read by Isabella Starr LeBlanc, Barbara Crampton, Angela Goethals, Andrew J. Robinson, and Stephen Graham Jones, with Stephen King as Grady Holmes. It was recorded by Jim Schnobrick at Audio Ruckus in Minneapolis, Sharon Carney at the Invisible Studios in West Hollywood, Jess Gutierrez at Dave and Dave Studio in Valley Village, California, and Taylor Marvin at Coop Studios in Boulder, Colorado. Editing, mix, and post-production by Ponderosa Post. The associate producer was Hana Matsudaira. The Angel of Indian Lake was produced and directed by Michael Noble. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio. The Angel of Indian Lake, the Indian Lake Trilogy Book 3, is available in print from Saga Press. Also available from Simon & Schuster Audio, My Heart is a Chainsaw, the Indian Lake Trilogy Book 1 by Stephen Graham Jones, read by Kara G. And The Babysitter Lives, an audio original by Stephen Graham Jones, read by Isabella Starr LeBlanc.